This is why you should be very careful who you talk to online. A 16-year-old girl was home with her mom when she got a disturbing text message from a boy she had recently met on Snapchat. He told her he was right outside of her house, but when she went to look, no one was there. Frightened, she decides to sleep in her mom's room that night, and right before she goes to bed, she gets another text from the boy that just says, "I'm in your house." She shows her mom, who immediately searches the whole house, checks every door, turns on every light. There's no one there. So even though they're creeped out, they go back to bed. The next morning, she gets up and she goes back to her bedroom and immediately feels like she's being watched. She checks in her closet, looks behind her door, there's no one there. Then she noticed that the shoe boxes she normally kept perfectly arranged next to her bed had been moved. So she crouches down to put them back in order, and then out of the corner of her eye, she notices something. The boy who was texting her was under her bed. Believe it or not, this is a well-documented, true story. In 1947, an American ship picked up a horrifying distress signal coming from an unidentified vessel. The first transmission was all officers, including the captain, are dead. The next transmission was the whole crew is dead. The last transmission was I die, and then silence. The Americans trace the signal back to a ship that's drifting off in the middle of the Indian Ocean. They quickly assemble a rescue team who boards the ship. They find the entire crew has perished in the exact same position. They are on their backs with their hands up as if fighting with some unseen force, and they look like this. There was no physical damage to the bodies or to the ship itself. However, even though it was 100 degrees outside, it was 40 degrees on the ship, and the bodies were rapidly decomposing. As soon as they tie up the ship to tow it in, it explodes, and then it sinks. To this day, no one knows what happened inside of that ship. Some say it was a chemical leak, others aren't so sure. This is why you should always be afraid of strangers. In 2014, a disturbing text message conversation between two classmates was uploaded to the internet. Annie and David are talking casually, and then Annie hears footsteps outside and goes to look. She sees someone standing in her yard, and she assumes it's just Dave playing a joke on her, but it's not. Suddenly, the stranger starts sprinting towards her house. He smashes through a window, and now he's in her house. She freaks out, jumps in a closet, and tells Dave to call the police. She tells Dave that he's yelling for her to come out, and then Annie stops texting. When Annie finally writes back that everything's just fine, Dave realizes something. He wasn't talking to Annie anymore. The best things in life are usually a surprise. 9 years ago, my wife and I were asked to adopt a lanky orange kitten with special needs. Although we felt nervous about the challenge, we ultimately agreed to adopt Special Ed. At first, caring for Eddie was totally overwhelming. He had so much energy, but he could barely walk, and so he'd be bouncing off the walls, literally. And so we started to worry about his health. But ultimately, we figured out a solution: pillows, blankets, and baby gates. Over the following 9 years, we moved 6 times, including across the country. We had 2 kids. We added 2 more cats, and through it all, Eddie was there. Then last month, we brought Eddie in for a routine checkup at the vet. And old Eddie was just fine. And in fact, today is Eddie's 9th birthday, and we're so thankful we still have this guy, and I'm so thankful for the 3 million of you guys that are following me. That's insane. So thank you very much. Eddie say thank you. He says thank you. We love you guys. Take care. You're about to hear one of the most disturbing true stories on the internet. In 1921, a German farmer woke up to find a deep set of footprints leading from the forest right up to his back door. Whoever had come to his house had not left yet. After making sure it wasn't just his family, he searched everywhere on his property, in his house, everywhere, and he could not determine who made the prints or where they went. A few weeks later, his maid abruptly quit, saying that every time she's alone in the house, she hears demonic voices in the attic. Shortly thereafter, he and his family start to hear the voices too. When no one's heard from them in a couple days, the neighbors go over to check and they find them in the barn. One by one, each of the family members made their way down to the barn, where they were systematically murdered and stacked in the corner. To this day, no one knows who or what is responsible for this crime. This sounds totally made up until you listen to the police report. In the early 90s, a teenage girl started to see these shadowy figures that would come into her room at night and crawl all around her room and even grab at her legs. At the same time, her health began to rapidly deteriorate, which ultimately led to her death, which doctors never understood. A few days after her death, her sister woke up to a whistling sound and saw a creature crawling around her room with no face. The same night, her mom was ripped out of bed by someone. The father calls the police, who come over, they search the house, they don't find anything, it's all quiet. As they're about to leave, they hear something. Horrifying screams coming out of the bedroom. They run inside, no one's in there, but there are these huge gashes on the wall that were not there before. The police get out of there. In the police report that was filed immediately after this house call, the chief inspector and the 3 officers that were there that night swear they saw and heard the same things as the family, which means the police officially believed that the house was haunted. This true story is so simple and so creepy. On June 21st, 2009, a 16-year-old wakes up to an empty house around 11 a.m. He heads downstairs, grabs a snack, and goes to the basement and plans on watching TV for the next few hours until he meets his friend around 3. About 30 minutes later, his mom comes downstairs and asks him, "Where have you been all day?" Confused, he says, "I've only been up for like 30 minutes. And then he looks at his phone, and it's after 7 o'clock at night. There's dozens of missed calls and several text messages from his friend and his mom asking, "Where are you?" He tells his mom that none of this makes any sense, but what she tells him is even worse. She said that she was there all day and saw him go into the basement at 11, but after that, he was gone all day. So for one day in the summer of 2009, this kid didn't exist. This girl literally lived a nightmare. A 17-year-old girl was watching TV late at night when her motion detector lights in her driveway suddenly went on. She assumed it was just an animal, so she got up, drew the blinds, and went back to watching TV. Then a little bit later, it happened again. Before she could even react, she looks over and clearly makes out a silhouette of a person right behind the blinds who starts banging aggressively on the window. The girl stands up and goes, "I'm gonna call the cops!" And the figure stops for just a second, sprints to the side door and starts pounding even louder on that, screaming incoherently. The girl runs to the bathroom, barricades herself inside while she waits for the police, and then her worst nightmares come true. She hears glass shatter in the other room. After a few minutes of silence, she opens her door just a crack to get a peek outside, and standing in her living room next to a broken window is some crazy old woman who looks over at her and starts sprinting toward her. The lady comes smashing into the door and starts wailing on it until the police arrive and take her away. She was a lunatic who had escaped her facility. This is why you should never explore the forest at night. Late at night in 2006, 2 men hear some strange noises coming from a forest near their house, so they decide to go have a look. After their footage went completely viral, they would admit that they actually only went into the woods just to scare themselves. They didn't actually expect to film anything. At some point on their walk, they start to notice more and more dead birds on the ground, and so one of them gets out his camera to start filming them. As they're filming the birds, you can tell that they're getting more and more spooked by the whole situation, and then one of the men hears something in the tree line, and the cameraman pans his camera to look. Human eyes don't reflect light. You're about to listen to one of the creepiest recordings on the internet. In 2013, a woman who lived alone kept waking up to these loud clicking sounds in her bedroom, so she went out and got an audio recorder and started recording her sleep. For the first month, she doesn't pick up anything other than normal sleeping sounds. And then one morning she gets up and listens to it, and she hears herself sleep talking, and someone talks back.
What are you doing?
After she uploaded it to the internet, experts confirmed that it was authentic and that she could not have made that voice. I can confirm that this is a true story. In 2004, a 16-year-old boy who was staying with a friend in their cabin up in New Hampshire was having a hard time falling asleep. Around 3 a.m., he was still awake, and he remembers thinking how eerily quiet and totally pitch black the house was, and that's when he heard it. The front door opens and someone comes inside and begins walking through the house down the hallway right outside of his door where it stops. The door opens and the boy is instantly petrified because in walks this tall, shadowy figure that marches to the center of the room and then bows onto the ground and disappears. The boy stays up all night, terrified that this thing's gonna re-emerge and just look at him. Finally, he hears his friend's mom making coffee in the kitchen, so he runs out to tell her what happened. The whole time he's explaining what happened, she's just looking at him with sympathy in her eyes. And finally she says, "My husband visited me last night too." Her husband was dead, and I was that 16-year-old boy. It's what she finds in the kitchen that's really scary. In the early 90s, a young girl was sleeping in her mom's bed when she suddenly woke up for no reason. She looked at her door and she saw her very affectionate cat kind of meowing down the hall as if someone was coming up to pet it, but she was next to her mom and they were the only ones in the house. The girl shakes her mom awake and points to the cat just as a man is walking past the door and disappears into the room across the hall. Before the man could come back out and find them, they both jump out the window, run across the street, and call the police. When the police arrive, the guy is nowhere to be found, but they do discover that the front door was unlocked, so that had to be the way he got in and out. But the mother swears up and down that she locked that door before she went to bed. A week later, the mother's cleaning their kitchen and she opens up the water heater closet where she finds this notebook that inside is their names and pictures of them in it, along with a pair of surgical gloves. Which means someone had snuck in at some point, was living in that closet spying on them, and then walking around their house at night. This story has the best ending ever. In 2003, a 9-year-old was home alone playing video games when he thinks he hears his cat meowing on the back patio, so he goes downstairs to let him in. He sees a deranged-looking man standing on his back patio howling at the sky, who then quickly looks at the boy. He grabs a fistful of cigarette butts from the ashtray, stuffs them in his mouth before he starts howling at the sky some more. After the police take the man away, they come back to talk to the boy and his family. Turns out the man had severe autism and lived in that boy's house up until his mother passed away, at which time he was transitioned to a mental institution. He broke out of that mental institution to go looking for his mom, which is how he came back to the boy's house. 15 years later, that same boy is sitting on his same back patio when he starts to hear that same meowing sound, and he looks up and it's the same autistic man walking towards his house. Knowing the man's story, he invites him into his house. The man's face lights up, he runs inside and starts crying. He was finally home. The men become friends, and every week Tom goes home to visit. I used some of the original footage, so please be advised. In the early 2000s, a video was discovered inside one of the scariest places on Earth. It's called the Catacombs, and it's one of the world's largest mass graves. To get to it, you need to wriggle through these claustrophobia-inducing tunnels hundreds of feet below the city of Paris. The video was found miles and miles into one of the least explored sections of the catacombs. The video is largely uneventful until he starts following these arrows that he sees on the wall and that he sees on the ground. And these arrows bring him to these rooms that are completely full of human bones, which catacombs experts have no idea where they are. Like, they don't know where this is. Then out of nowhere, something spooks him and he starts sprinting deeper and deeper into the catacombs until he drops his camera, and then all you hear is his panic breathing and footsteps as he disappears. While nobody knows what actually happened to this guy, everybody seems to agree that the footage is authentic. The more you think about how this true story ends, the creepier it gets. In 2015, a college student was renting the basement apartment of his friend's house. One weekend, his basement roommates take off for the night, so he decides to use that time to get some homework done distraction-free. But as soon as he sits down to do his work, his friend upstairs and his family starts making all this noise, moving furniture around, shuffling feet. It's impossible to focus, so he picks up his phone and he texts his friend. "You guys sound like you're really having a good time up there. I'm not really getting anything done. Can I come up?" And his buddy says, "No one is home. We went to Wisconsin for the weekend." Terrified, he runs out the side door to get a look in the window to see who's making all the noise. All the lights are off in the house. There's not a single car in the driveway. He had been home alone the whole time. This is easily the scariest story I've ever heard. Where is it? I heard the door open. I heard the bells. I heard the pot. I heard the footsteps. I saw the door open. I see the thing walk in. I watched it walk down the aisle. I watched it bend over. It's in the room. Where is it? And this is night 1. There's 2 more nights of this, and it gets worse. The full episode is on my YouTube channel. Go check it out. There's a link in my bio on TikTok. And please subscribe because I'm going to be doing long episodes every week. Enjoy. As you listen to this crazy story, think about how you would handle this. In the spring of 2003, a highly skilled mountaineer set off for a one-day hike in a Utah canyon. He didn't tell anybody where he was going. As he was descending a narrow portion of the canyon, a boulder came dislodged and landed on his right arm and hand, pinning him there. Initially, he tried everything he could to get his hand free, but he couldn't do it. He even considered amputating, but his knife couldn't cut through the bone. After 5 days, he was out of water and he knew that he was about to die. So he took out his camera and recorded goodbyes to his family before falling asleep, believing he would never wake up again. When he woke up the next morning and hadn't died, he suddenly felt totally motivated to live. And so he did the unthinkable. He managed to break his arm using torque and then cut through the break in his arm with his dull pocket knife. It took him almost 2 hours to do this. After the amputation, he was able to rappel down and get the help that he needed. Aron Ralston is quoted as saying, "I did not lose my arm, I gained back my life." This is why you should always lock your crawl space. In 2019, a young woman had just moved into the second floor of an apartment building. She noticed a tiny crawl space that connected all the apartments on the floor, but she wrote it off, citing, "Who'd be small enough to crawl through that?" One night, she walks into her living room, and out on the fire escape is a tiny woman desperately trying to yank open her locked windows. Terrified, she hides behind some furniture until the woman eventually leaves, at which point she runs into a room, grabs her phone, and calls the police. While waiting for the cops to arrive, she hears something above her and she looks up. One of the ceiling tiles had popped up, and the woman from the fire escape is staring down at her. She'd used the crawl space to get up there. The girl screams and the woman scurries away. It took 3 days for the police to finally get the woman out of the crawl space and bring her into custody. Turns out she was on some unknown, extremely hard drug and had totally lost her mind. If you're alone right now, don't watch this video. In the winter of 2018, a man who was living alone in the mountains wakes up to find a red ball sitting on his front yard. He assumed the only neighbor he had must have kids, and so he kicks the ball over the fence, goes inside, doesn't think anything of it. That night, he wakes up to the sound of kids laughing outside of his window. He goes outside to check on them because it's the middle of the night, and there's no kids anywhere, but that red ball is back on his property. So he picks it up, brings it in his house, and goes back to bed. The next morning, he goes over to his neighbor's house to let them know that their kids were out in his yard in the middle of the night. But it turns out his neighbor is just some old man who lives alone, and there aren't any kids anywhere in the area. That night, he wakes up again to the sound of kids on his property, and when he looks outside, there's no kids, but that red ball is back on his property. Panicked, he runs downstairs to make sure the one he brought in is still inside, and it's gone. He checked every window and door, and everything was still locked. It didn't make any sense. He decides to look out the window one more time, and off in the distance is some weird, stiff figure watching him. You're about to watch one of the creepiest videos on the internet. In 2015, 2 men were driving at night when they spot what looked like a hunched over person in the middle of the road way off in the distance. As they got closer, they started hearing shrieking sounds in the woods all around them, and then they lost sight of the hunched over person. Feeling totally spooked, the guy in the passenger seat starts filming. Despite numerous attempts, this video has never been debunked. If you scare easily, this is not the video for you. In 2001, 4 teens decide to explore an abandoned mansion that locals believed a satanic cult was using to perform sadistic rituals. They go in through a basement window and find a piece of raw meat sitting on the ground with stones around it. It creeps them out, but they keep going. They make it to the first floor, but it's so hot up there they think something's on fire and they run away. The next night, they're feeling brave and decide to go back to the mansion and explore the top floors. They were not ready for what they find.
For my bag, alright. What the hell's that? That on the floor. Right there.
Experts believe that the teens stumbled across a satanic cult performing a ritual. Whether you believe this video is real or not, it is undeniably scary. In 2003, guests at a hotel started calling the front desk about a screaming woman on the second floor, so the security guard went to go have a look. As he's making his way upstairs, the dispatcher tells him it's room 209 and no one's checked into that room. When he gets outside room 209, he hears it too. Take a listen. The security guard is visibly shaken, but finally musters the courage to go into the room to investigate, only to come out seconds later with a terrifying report.
John wants you to call the police right now if you don't mind. He says no one's in there, but that all of the furniture's been turned upside down.
No one knows what happened in room 209, and despite numerous investigations, no one's debunked this footage. Over the years, the hotel has had dozens of noise complaints from that room. If you scare easily, I wouldn't watch this video. In 2013, a mine explorer found this entrance to an abandoned mine and decided to go have a look around. He decides to film his experience and upload it to his YouTube channel, where he had uploaded hundreds of other videos of him exploring mines, but he never once references the paranormal or ghosts or anything like that until this video. As soon as he steps foot inside, he tells the camera that he has a really uneasy feeling about being there and wonders if he should even keep going, but he does. Everything seems pretty normal until he gets to a section in the mine where there's a bunch of chains hanging down from the ceiling. He hears something in the back of the tunnel, so he pulls his flashlight out and he shines it towards the back, and he sees a chain swinging, and it shouldn't be, because there's no draft and he's all alone, and you can tell he's scared by the way he starts talking. Although he's totally freaked out, he wants to know what's causing the chain to swing, so he goes farther and farther into the mine until he hears something. People whispering in every direction. He gets totally spooked and runs out. If you don't want to sleep tonight, watch the whole video. This is why you should never open your door for strangers. In 2013, a woman let her dog out to use the bathroom one more time before bed. After only a few minutes, she starts hearing scratching on her door, which is typically the sound her dog makes when he's ready to come in. But it just seemed way too soon for him to be done being outside. So she decides to look through the peephole to make sure it really is her dog. But what she sees is terrifying. A deranged-looking man is right outside her door, staring intently at her door handle, waiting for it to turn open. As she's looking in horror, unable to do anything, he starts scratching at the door as hard as he can, never leaving his gaze from the door handle. She manages to stifle a scream, she backs away and realizes her dog is still outside. So she goes to the side window, but there's no sign of her dog, and so she goes back to the door to see if maybe the man's moved. He hasn't moved, his mouth is open, and he's staring directly at the peephole. Then he turns around and walks away. With the man gone, she discovers her dog unharmed, his leash had just been cut. But that means he had a knife. This is why you should always lock your doors. A junior in high school was home alone working on a paper while his parents were out to dinner. All night he sits with his back to his door, sitting at his desk with his noise-canceling headphones on. Around 11 o'clock, he takes his headphones off at the same time his parents are returning to the house, and he hears his mom from downstairs yell, "Hey Adrian, what happened?" Confused, he runs downstairs and sees right away what she's looking at. Muddy footprints all over the rug. He tells her, "I didn't leave my desk." And then they realize someone must have broken in. They look at the footprints and there's none leaving the house. They're worried someone's still in the house, so they run into the garage, terrified, call the police. Police arrive and they don't find anyone in the house, but they do make a chilling discovery upstairs. The police bring them to the kid's bedroom door, which had been left open all night, and they point to the message written on it in Sharpie. This is the actual transcript of what was written on his door, which means for nearly 2 hours, someone stood in this kid's doorway watching him. If you scare easily, swipe on. In 1989, a woman started hearing strange banging sounds in her walls and in the ceiling. And then one night, the crawl space to her attic was open, so she went to go have a look. When she's just feet away, an old man suddenly appears in the crawl space and looks her dead in the eye before vanishing. There was nobody else in the house. Worried no one's going to take her seriously over an apparent ghost in her house, she ends up calling a paranormal investigator. When the paranormal crew arrived, they were actually very skeptical until they heard loud banging in the attic and they decided to go up and have a look. As soon as the two men get up into the attic, one of them screams and suddenly disappears. The other, who didn't have a flashlight, starts using the flash on his camera to illuminate the attic. And he takes one of the most famous pictures in paranormal history. His partner, who was in total shock, had been lifted off the ground and tied to one of the beams. That was the last night the woman ever stayed in the house. However, it's still being rented out today, but nobody stays longer than 1 or 2 months. This story is why people are scared of the dark. In the early 2010s, a man and his dog were staying at a very isolated cabin in the backcountry of Oregon. One day, he notices some human footprints leading up to and then disappearing away from his cabin, but there aren't any cabins anywhere near his, but he writes it off. That night, he wakes up to the sound of footsteps on his roof. Feeling brave, he heads to the balcony to take a look. He doesn't see anything on the roof, but his dog sees something out in the forest and he starts growling. The man starts to scan the tree line and then he sees it. A freakishly tall man is squatting on a branch just 20 feet away from his balcony. His arms are outstretched, his mouth is open, no expression on his face. The man, in terror, backs into his house, grabs his dog, shuts the door, shines the light on the branch, but it's gone. Now feeling freaked out, he shuts all the blinds, makes sure all the doors are locked, he gets in his bed, and for the next several hours he hears tapping on both of the 2 doors from his friend outside. And all you gotta do is solve the hardest internet puzzle in existence. In 2012, an anonymous user posted this message to a chat room challenging intelligent people to find the hidden message inside of it. Within minutes of it being posted, someone had found a hidden link inside of the image, which brought them to another image with another hidden message. And as soon as they got through this one, It brought them to many, many more, eventually giving way to physical locations around the globe. But every time someone had a breakthrough, it just brought them back into another puzzle that they had to solve that would bring them to another puzzle, and it went on and on. The world's best hackers worked tirelessly to be the first person to find the prize at the end of the scavenger hunt, but no one reported finding anything. A month after that first post went up, the same anonymous user announced that they had found their winners and that the puzzle was now shut off. Every January since 2012, they've launched a new puzzle, and every year someone wins and we never know what the prize is because apparently it's worth staying silent for. The last one is mind-blowing. Green, yellow, orange, and red peppers are actually all the same pepper. They've just been picked at different stages of ripeness. The club in club sandwich stands for chicken and lettuce under bacon. The total weight of ants on Earth is equal to the total weight of humans on Earth. Speaking of which, there are more life forms on our bodies than there are people on the Earth. 50% of our hand strength comes from our pinky. And last but not least, 2 million people decided to follow this dude on TikTok. I was shocked at 1 million, and now I'm just dumbfounded. I don't know how I got so lucky to have such amazing people supporting me and following me. I really can't thank you enough. Thank you guys so much for giving me this platform. I owe it all to you. Thank you. This is why you should always check under your bed for monsters. In 2012, a young woman who was on the phone with her boyfriend walks downstairs to the lobby of her apartment building, collects her mail, and then heads back up to her room. She sits on her bed to start sifting through the mail when she drops her phone and it falls under the bed. She lies down on the ground to try to reach her arm out to grab her phone when she notices something horrible underneath her bed. A man is lying underneath her bed with his back to her. He's in the fetal position. She manages not to scream. She grabs her phone and says to her boyfriend, "Hey, I gotta go shower. I'll call you back." And she quickly runs into the bathroom, locks the door, turns on the shower, and then jumps out her first floor window. Once she's safely across the street, she calls the police, who quickly arrive, and they go inside and they come out with a deranged, skinny-looking man. Before they take him away, one of the officers walks over to her with a very grim look on his face. He looks at her and he just says, "We found him standing outside of your bathroom holding a knife. He was waiting for you." There is no way you can predict the ending to this one. In 1900, a man arrived on a little island off the coast of Scotland to relieve one of the 3 lighthouse workers that was there. As he neared the lighthouse, he saw the iron railings had been folded and ripped out of the concrete, and a big boulder that sat out front had moved. When he reached the lighthouse, the door was open, and inside there were half-eaten bowls of food sitting on the table, chairs flipped over, no sign of the 3 men, but there was one clue: their logbook. In the last few entries of the logbook, one of the men describes the winds outside as being more severe than anything he's seen in 20 years. He also says they've been crying and praying for the storm to stop. But why would 3 highly experienced lighthouse workers that have probably ridden out dozens of bad storms before, and they were in a brand new lighthouse that was considered safe, be crying and praying for this particular storm to end? The very last thing they wrote before they disappeared without a trace was, "Storm ended, sea is calm, God is over all." Except here's the problem: there was never any storm anywhere near their island that week. This is a highly controversial topic. In 2016, a man posted on Facebook that the local police were going to kill him that weekend. That weekend, he died under very suspicious circumstances that we will get to. Immediately following his death, his YouTube page, which contained footage from his home's camera system, went viral. One of his videos shows a large group of police officers standing in front of his house for no apparent reason in the middle of the night. Others show what he claims to be plainclothes police officers casing his property. But the most talked about video is the one where the van shows up in front of his house, revealing a guy with a fairly high-tech camera who just starts filming his house. The man was found dead in his home after it had burned down, and he was found to have stab wounds on his back and his stomach. His death was determined to be self-inflicted. However, the debate rages on online: what happened to John Lang? When you finish this video, you're going to Google 2 words. In 2014, 2 Dutch college students were staying in Panama when they decided to take their host family's dog out for a walk. The dog returned, but the girls didn't. After 10 weeks without any leads, a local woman turned in a blue backpack that contained the girls' cell phones and their camera. Using their call log, they were able to determine that the girls would attempt to reach emergency services 77 times, all unsuccessful, starting just hours into their trip. It was also determined that 5 days after those 77 calls, somebody tried unsuccessfully several times to unlock the girls' phones. But the most distressing thing is what was found on the camera. The first set was taken on the day they left and they were totally normal. The second set was taken in the middle of the night over a week after they had left, and it showed all their belongings neatly laid out on a rock, and it showed one of the girls who appeared to be hurt. They found their remains spread out around the area where the backpack was found, and some of their bones appeared to have been bleached. There is still no official cause of death or explanation as to what happened. At the end of this video, you're going to Google 2 words. In 1979, 5 men left for a fishing trip off the coast of Hawaii, got caught in a bad storm, and never returned. After an exhaustive search turned up 0 leads, the families gave up hope and people moved on with their lives. 10 years later, a crazy coincidence leads to a major break in this case. One of the men that was involved in the original search for the missing fishermen happened to be on a wildlife expedition on an uninhabited island 2,000 miles west of Hawaii when he sees something down on the beach. It was a fishing boat that turned out to be the same one from 10 years earlier, and he found a shallow grave that contained the skeletal remains of one of the 5 missing fishermen, and he was clutching this weird booklet that contained little pieces of tinfoil on every page. Experts say the boat could have drifted 2,000 miles to that island in 3 months, except the government surveyed that island 6 years after they went missing and there was no sign of them. So where were they between the disappearance and the survey, and who buried that guy in that booklet? I was not ready for the ending to this one. In the early 2010s, 2 15-year-old friends were camping at a state forest with their families. One night, the friends decide they want to go explore the woods around their campsite, but they want to see how far they can get without using a flashlight. A little ways into their trip, they start to hear some whispering behind them, and they quickly turn around, pull out their flashlights, and start looking for what was making the sound. After a short search, they don't find anything, and so even though they're a little bit freaked out, they decide to put their flashlights away and carry on into the woods. After a little while, they start to hear the whispering again. So they pull out their flashlights. Now they're determined to find out what the heck is making this sound. They do a very thorough search, they don't find anything, and at this point, they're too freaked out and they decide to start heading back. As they start retracing their steps, they see what was making the sound. A woman comes out from behind a tree, crawling towards them, muttering random words. She sees them, stands up, and says, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking for my campsite." They're a half mile from the nearest campsite. Most of you will be guilty of number 3. You're on vacation in Illinois, and a local salamander dealer comes up to you and he says, "Hey, can I interest you in buying 76 salamanders?" And you're like, "Actually, that sounds pretty good. I can get a lot done with 76 salamanders. Give me all 76. You fool. 75 is the legal limit. On the last day of your tobogganing trip to South Dakota, you're feeling tired, and so you decide to avoid the slopes that day and hit up the local cheese factory and take a tour. You get inside, you start feeling sleepy, and you decide, you know what, this is a good place to take a nap, and so you do. You fool. It's illegal to nap in cheese factories in South Dakota. It's nighttime and you've just arrived in New Hampshire for the National Spelunking Championship, and you're totally stressed about the competition the next day. So you go down to the beach to collect yourself, clear your mind, and you notice a huge amount of seaweed on the beach, and you think, maybe I should collect this, and so you do. You fool. You can't collect seaweed at night in New Hampshire. When you finish this video, you're going to Google 2 words. In 1959, 9 very experienced Russian hikers set off on a 16-day expedition into the mountains. 7 days in and some bad weather forced them to make camp about halfway up a mountain. The last pictures of them alive were taken at this campsite. When the hikers never showed up, they sent out a search party who quickly found their campsite, and it was immediately apparent that something horrible had happened to them. All their tents had been slashed open, but from the inside, and inside the tents was all their gear, neatly folded and stacked inside the remains of the tents. No bodies, but 9 sets of footprints walking away from the camp. Using the footprints, they discovered 5 hikers who were only dressed in underwear who had died of hypothermia. They found the other 4 hikers 250 feet away in a riverbed wearing the clothes of their dead hiker friends. They had skull fractures, chest fractures, eyes, tongue, lips missing, and their bodies were radioactive. Official cause of death? Unknown compelling force. When you finish this video, you're going to Google 3 words. In 2014, a German man and his friends went on vacation to a seaside resort in Bulgaria. On the last day of his trip, he got in a fight with 4 other guys over a soccer match, leaving him with a perforated eardrum. A doctor prescribes him an antibiotic and advises him not to fly home the next day with his friends because a change in air pressure could further damage his eardrum. So, his friends take off the next day and he decides to stay one more night and checks into a cheap hotel. That night, his mother gets a distressing phone call from him where in a low whisper he says that 4 men are coming to kill him and that she should cancel all of his bank cards. Footage from that night in the hotel shows him pacing up and down the hallway and even hiding in an elevator. Early the next day, he heads to the airport, but before he goes through security, he does something truly unexplainable that was captured on camera and has been viewed millions of times across the internet. He stops, drops all of his things, turns around and sprints out of the airport yelling, "I don't want to die here," climbs a barbed wire fence, disappears into the forest, never to be seen again. When this video is over, you're going to Google 3 words. In 2013, a Canadian college student was traveling alone through California when she decided to spend the night in a notoriously sketchy hotel in Los Angeles. When she didn't check in with her family that night, they actually called the police, and the police discovered that she was missing. And then the hotel released some insane footage of her in an elevator. As soon as she steps into the elevator, she presses all the buttons and then starts hiding in the corner, and then starts poking her head out of the elevator into the hall over and over again, as if looking for someone that was chasing her, but there's nobody in the hall. Then, inexplicably, she stands right in the threshold of the elevator and starts flashing her hands around like crazy and then runs away, and it's the last anybody sees her alive. It wasn't until a few weeks later, when residents of the hotel noticed a foul taste in their water, that they discovered her body floating in the water tanks on the roof. They ruled her death an accident, but that means she would have had to get onto a locked roof, climb a 10-foot high water tank without a ladder, open a heavy lid, and wriggle inside the tank on her own. The third one? That'll get you. You're on vacation in Kentucky, and a local blue duck salesman approaches you and says, "Hey, are you interested in buying 5 blue ducks?" "Yeah. Give me all 5. "You fool. It's illegal to purchase less than 6. You're on vacation in Idaho, and a local oversized candy salesman approaches you and says, "Hey, are you interested in buying a 51-pound box of candy for your fiance?" "Yeah. Hit me." "You fool. 50 pounds is the legal limit." You're on vacation in Indiana, and a local horse salesman approaches you and says, "Hey, are you interested in buying a horse that can only run at exactly 11 miles per hour?" "Yeah. Giddy up." "You fool. 10 miles per hour is the legal limit."